discussion about using sitting as the new smoking among adults. But according to a 2010 survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation, children are spending 85% of their waking hours sitting. If you combine sitting at school with driving to school, doing homeworks, and eating meals, and I would add probably playing video games. So what can or should we be doing to avert the dangers of sitting among our children? Here to talk about this issue is Dr. Turner Osler, a trauma surgeon from Burlington, Vermont. Dr. Osler has spent most of his career dealing with gunshot wounds, burns, and other quick traumas. But now Dr. Osler has trained his attention on a different kind of trauma, which is sitting. As with RSI, this is a cumulative trauma that can take years to develop instead of just seconds. But it can be just as deadly as more and more research is revealing. So welcome, Dr. Osler.
Hi, Deborah. Good to be here, I guess, or sort of, well, here, yeah.
Well, we're both here, in a sense. So we were talking earlier, and I'd like you to hear from you why chairs and sitting in general is so bad for our health.
Well, the human species took a fateful step 3 million years ago when we stepped out of the savanna and onto open plains where we became not gatherers, but hunter-gatherers. And that required that we walk a lot and run to hunt. Over 3 million years, our biochemistry came to depend on that, and now we're obligate exercise animals. Other primates that live as just gatherers, bonobos, chimps, orangutans, gorillas, don't have an obligate need for exercise, but humans do. And so the business of just sitting, as adults do, as much as 11 hours a day, really is terrible for our biochemistry because it's expecting us to walk 1,000 steps a day. When we lose that, terrible things happen to our lipid profile, our insulin levels, you know, the litany of diseases that comes from being inactive includes things like obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. All of these result in shortened lifespan. And you know, we've come to think chairs are just part of the normal built environment because, heck, we grew up with them. How could they be considered problematic? Well, smoking wasn't considered problematic until you know, people got down to studying it and discovered that it was a public health catastrophe. I think the same is going to be true for sitting.
I actually did a paper on the correlation between smoking and RSI, and you'd be amazed at the parallels with that. But yeah, I mean, smoking and sitting, well, sitting has actually surpassed smoking now as the new cause of all-cause mortality. But in addition to the metabolic problems you mentioned, high cholesterol, diabetes, there's also some pretty serious musculoskeletal problems associated with sitting.
Right. You know, the posture that people are forced to adopt by conventional chairs is really not a posture that humans are designed for. We're designed to stand and walk and run with a certain, you know, elegant posture. But as soon as you sit in a chair, you're kind of forced into that chair's idea of what posture is. And when chairs are designed and built, they're built to be inexpensive to manufacture and stackable in the case of schools to make it easy for the custodians to clean up. But they're not really designed to foster optimal posture. We know this because if you ever go to an ergonomic furniture exposition or conference, as I have, you know, there are lots and lots and lots of furniture manufacturers claiming that their chair is somehow less destructive than their competitors' chairs. But if you look at them, they're all the same. And if all of these innovations, you know, the headrest, the backrest, the armrest, the footrest, the lumbar support, if all these things were working, how come 80% of America still has back pain?
That's a good question.
It's a self-evident failure. And yet, if you go to academic ergonomic conferences, you know, people claim that, you know, they're doing fine. Whereas if you go to the emergency room, you can see that they are not. Chairs have been a catastrophe. And until we kind of recognize that and come to grips with it, they're going to continue to be a catastrophe. A catastrophe, I might add, that costs the United States $100 billion a year in back pain.
Have you seen people in the emergency room because of sitting?
Oh, well, I've seen people in the emergency room because of back pain. And when I was a young doctor in training, the perfectly healthy people would come in howling in pain. And, there was nothing to see. Their physical exam was normal, the x-rays were fine, the blood work was fine, and yet, they were just like in agony. And, because we didn't understand it, and because we were pretty sure nobody was going to die, I'm afraid we just gave them pain medicine and sent them on their way and said, you'll be better in a week, which almost always was the case. To this day, I'm a little astonished at how little intellectual curiosity we had about why this was happening, because, it was clearly a life-changing event for the poor patient. They'd suffered to drag themselves to the emergency and wait for hours to be seen by somebody like myself who didn't have much to offer except pain medicine and the assurance that they weren't dying. Although it can be, and of course God has a sense of humor. And when I hit the age of 45, I had an episode of low back pain. All of a sudden, I understood what these patients had been complaining about. It was agonizing and it was a little scary. And as we know, it's Western chairs that are associated with the development of low back pain. Cultures that don't sit in Western chairs don't have this problem. So it's really a catastrophic public health issue that is self-inflicted.
And I would like to just interject here that the traditional office chair that you were talking about seeing at the ergonomic conferences, they tend to put people in a forward head position.
You're right.
And because of that, they cannot use their upper extremities properly because their shoulders become caved in, their backs become curved, and they are no longer balanced, with an open front of the chest and strong rhomboids in the back. Those muscles are no longer supporting the upper extremity. So they are supporting themselves by resting on their desks or their armrests or any other available surface. And that can lead to really devastating soft tissue injuries all along the upper extremity, which goes from the shoulder blade to the fingertip. So it's, one of the first things that I do when I'm helping someone is look at their seating. And for that, I'd like you to talk about this new chair that you have designed for children.
Right. So we've been pitching the idea of active sitting for a while, and it's very hard to get traction in the world of office furniture and ergonomics because big chair has it pretty locked up. It's hard to be heard. And so we had the idea that, what we needed was an audience that didn't have preconceptions about what chairs ought to look like and what sitting was. So we would take the argument to children who, we thought would be fair judges because they're honest. So but the idea of getting active chairs into schools immediately hits the roadblock that we don't have money to buy preschoolers glitter for their art projects. So swapping out all the chairs in the school seems like just a fool's errand. School boards don't have that kind of discretionary income. So we hit on the idea of making chairs that were free, which seemed like a price point that most people would be able to hit. But it's not such an easy lift. Except I have friends who are into this kind of thinking and are studied design at Pratt. And they're really smart. And so we came up with a design for a chair that could be just made out of plywood with a CNC router. All you need is a piece of plywood.
What's a CNC router? I'm uneducated.
No, and I didn't know what a CNC router was either. No reasonable person would. A CNC router, CNC stands for Computer Numeric Controlled Router. A router is a device that has a cutting head that moves. And a computer numeric controlled router, a CNC router, is a cutting head that can cut wood or metal even, that can move up and down, it can move in and out, and it can move right and left. That's it.
Oh.
And if you think about it, a cutting head that can move in any direction can carve any shape. So they are immensely versatile. And if you take a piece of plywood, well, plywood, of course, is immensely versatile as well. It's wood that's laid up with the grains, at 90 degrees, 90 degrees, 90 degrees. And so it's immensely strong and immensely light. It was as I like to say, the carbon fiber of the 20th century. They made fighter planes out of it. They made patrol boats. Kennedy's PT-109 was made out of plywood.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Very light, very strong stuff. And so if you have a sheet of plywood, very cheap, very strong, very light, and a CNC router that can cut any shape, well, now you can make pieces of any size and any shape. You just put the plywood in the machine, turn it on, and the head cuts the pieces. The design part comes in thinking up the way the pieces should be so that they turn into a chair. To make it more interesting, we wanted it to turn into a chair that didn't require glue or screw or any glues or screws or anything to put it together. It would just like click together with locking joints. We happen to have invented and patented some of those, so we had that library of ways to make plywood just click together. And then the final constraint was we wanted the chair to be one that would allow people to move while they're sitting without having to pre-position themselves. I'm sitting on one now as it happens.
So am I.
Here's the idea. This is like, we call it a button chair because it kind of looks like a button. The top of it
That's right, yeah.
is sewn on to the bottom of it with a piece of bungee cord, kind of like you sew on a button with thread. It's got 4 pieces. It's got the top that moves. It's got a piece that kind of holds everything together, and then 2 legs.
Is that a tennis ball?
Right, and it's the tennis ball that allows the motion to happen. We picked the tennis ball as the mechanism for rocking because they're cheaper than free. People will pay you to take these things away. So if somebody has a CNC router and a piece of plywood, they can cut as many chairs as they want, and then they just need a little piece of bungee cord and an old tennis ball, and you have an active chair. The thing I really like about it is you can, because the CNC router, the CNC router just follows instructions, and the instructions are a digital file. So we can send the digital file, the CNC router instructions, over the internet to anybody who wants it. And if they have a CNC router and a piece of plywood, they can make as many chairs as they want. We pitched this idea on a TED Talk a couple of months ago, and we've sent out about 20 copies of this program to places like London and New Zealand and New Hampshire and Singapore, and people love the idea of free, and I love the idea of kids sitting on chairs that keep them moving. And so, as a way to kind of break it open, so that the idea of active sitting can get some oxygen and get some room in the debate, I thought, well, this is how to do it. We'll just give away this design, and heck, if kids can sit actively, that'll be terrific. So we had a half a dozen of our chairs in the classroom for the last semester this past spring in a 6th grade classroom in Edmonds Middle School in Burlington, Vermont. The kids loved them. They just gave it the highest score on the questionnaire we gave them. They want us to come back with 16 more chairs for them in 2 weeks. So we've got a couple of experimental groups going here in Burlington. The teachers, go ahead.
One of the things that I'd like to interject here is that I actually saw the chair in action on an adult model with an actual child who was doing wheelies and really wailing on this chair. And it just really made my heart sing, because the more active you are, the more you're moving, the less likely you are to get one of these diseases. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how the metabolic rate is raised because of active sitting and the study you've done on that.
Yeah, just by moving, your metabolic rate goes up. It turns out that sitting slumped, all your muscles go dark and your metabolic rate kind of plunges. But if you're merely trying to keep yourself balanced on an unstable seat, and this is kind of what active sitting allows. The seat top can move in any direction. So in order to stay balanced on it, you have to be continuously engaged using your core muscles to stay centered and balanced. It's not a lot of work, and it immediately isn't part of you can listen in to the conversation that your spinal reflexes are having with gravity, but you don't have to. it's all handled at the spinal reflex level. So, you know, it just kind of feels like floating. It doesn't feel like you're actually doing anything.
So you don't have to concentrate to sit on the chair. And when
No.
we're talking about metabolic rate, we're talking about burning calories, moving, keeping the blood flowing, other things like that.
Exactly. And we know it raises your metabolic rate by about 17% because by putting a mask on people and measuring their expired fraction of carbon dioxide, you can see how rapidly they're consuming oxygen and glucose, and then you do the math and you can work out their caloric burn rate. And walking takes you up by about 30%. Our chairs get you about halfway to walking, which is sort of startling, but it turns out most of walking isn't your legs. Your legs are just kind of along for the ride. Most of walking actually happens in your spine and your pelvis. And all of that can happen on our chair. I've come to kind of think of our chairs as walking without having to actually decide where you're going, because your spine and your pelvis are doing roughly the same activity as walking, but you don't need all of that junk of a treadmill desk. You just have it kind of built in at the pelvis level. One of my favorite videos which was I was introduced to by one of my Feldenkrais teachers, of a guy who's just like walking quite comfortably who has no legs. You know?
I've seen that video, the spinal engine.
Right, you think, how is that happening? And the answer is, well, he's walking quite comfortably on his ischial tuberosities. Your legs are really not what walking about. Your legs are just the amplification system. The business of walking happens in your hips and your pelvis and your lumbar spine and really your whole spine. So all of that machinery is working, which is why merely making a chair unstable gives you such a metabolic boost, and why when people get up from active sitting, they just walk away because they've really been walking the whole time. You watch people get up from sitting in an office chair, and their discs have become differentially compressed, and the they have to get up. They're like, get straightened out. But on an active chair, that doesn't happen because they've been really walking the whole time, and so they just get up and leave.
And also, you had said in an earlier conversation, Dr. Osler, something that I loved about how kids really like to move and like to fidget. And this is...
No, when we take these chairs out and put them on the walking street in Burlington on Church Street, grown-ups will come and they sit on them, and they figure it out, and they spin around, they say, this is supposed to make my posture better, isn't it? It's supposed to keep me active, right? As though, it's like some exam question. Mm-hmm. But kids sit on it and they just start laughing. They just think it's hilarious to sit on a chair that wiggles underneath them. And I think kids understand the project correctly, and adults are just trying to make sense out of it. But what kids get is that it's fun.
Yeah.
And not to put too fine a point on it, but it turns out that when kids are moving, sitting on active chairs, they actually do better on math tests.
They do better on math tests?
They do better on math tests, right. This idea was handed to me actually by a parent who ran into our chairs on Church Street when she was just passing by, and she sat down on it and kind of got the idea. And then she said, I wish my kid had this last month when he was sitting for the New England achievement tests. We have like these kneecap tests, they're called, to test kids' achievement. He said, I'm sure my kid would have done better on that test if he could, instead of sitting, frozen all day, he could have been sitting on one of your chairs while he was taking the test. This is just a parent's intuition. But parents are really smart about their kids. And when researchers actually measured this by putting an electroencephalogram on kids and putting them on active chairs and putting them on dead chairs and recording and measuring stuff, they find that the electroencephalogram changes in kids who are sitting on active chairs. Is that even good? Well, you can also give them a math test, and they get higher scores on math tests when they're embodied rather than just frozen. Because really, your body is designed to work as a whole.
Yes.
And if you make people sit still, it doesn't work as well. We know that when people doodle during a lecture, they have better retention than if you just make them sit still.
Yes.
So by giving people total embodiment, the whole purpose of school, which is to learn stuff, I think, is improved. So it's not just that kids have better posture and better metabolism and stuff like that. It's also that the project of learning goes better when kids are sitting active.
I wonder if that has to do with the fact that if you're not slouching and confined, you can breathe better.
Well, you can
Get the
breathe better, but
oxygen.
I think it's more than that. I think it's that by moving your whole body, all of the neurons in your brain are getting input from other places rather than just like nodding off. Because, that's kind of a vague sort of description, but that's what the electroencephalogram seems to point to. And I have to say that, I went to medical school. I do research. I have a master's in biostatistics. I know about this stuff. So when I say something like that, I actually mean it. For example, we know that when girls sit still, the blood flow to their legs is adversely impacted it goes down by about 30%.
Wow.
You can measure this with duplex scanners. Here's a paper from Experimental Physiology that was published, about 5 years ago from a bunch of reachers in
Yeah, I
Canada.
think I remember reading about that.
They took a bunch of kids and just when they were sitting still, the blood flow of their legs went to hell. But if you get them up every so often and walk around, it's reversible. Okay, fine. But if you don't get them up and walk them around and you leave them in that condition for years, like 12 years of school, the outcome could be catastrophic.
Yes.
So, when we start measuring things very carefully with, advanced medical tools, we find, it is true that sitting still has profound physiologic consequences, and it takes years for them to manifest themselves. But, we don't want to find out what those consequences are. It'd be much better to keep kids moving in one way or another.
I have a question for you. Have you tested the teachers? Do you think the teachers feel like the children are more engaged when they're sitting on the button chair?
Right. No, we've only had them in a few classrooms now, but the teachers, point out immediately that, we put in about half enough chairs for all the kids. All of the button chairs were constantly in use. Not every kid was enthralled with the project, but most were. He felt that kids with a tendency to ADD were demonstrably better off by sitting on a chair that kind of, as he phrased it, let them get the wiggle out. It's like sanctioned squirming. It's a kind of fidgeting
Yes.
that is allowed because it's built into your furniture. Okay, if a kid is like doing this stuff on a chair, a standard chair, they may get reprimanded, and then it's a downhill spiral from there. But if you put them on a chair that just kind of lets them constantly reorganize their posture, it doesn't seem to bother anybody. They get away with it, and they get it. Kids intuitively know that sitting still is a terrible idea, and if you just let them move, they will.
Well said. I can't think of any better way to finish up that than saying kids intuitively know that sitting still is a bad idea. And I'd like to pass that along to all the adults who are watching this.
Well, and all the teachers and school boards that have purview over these kinds of decisions. We can do better for our kids because we require them to go to school, and if we require them to sit in a way that's destructive to their learning and their health, that's terrible.
It is. We're destroying people with chairs. I've been to other countries where people hunker. It's a deep squat where your tailbone is nearly on the floor. And that is one of the
most Americans can't do.
They can't do it. And if you do those kinds of deep squats every day, you're going to live 2 years longer, according to this anatomy book that I was telling you about. So this ability to come from a deep squat using your quads to stand up. And one of the things that I do when I'm helping people with RSI is focus on the whole body, because then they're not dragging themselves or pushing themselves and hurting their shoulders trying to get out of this chair. They can do it because they've got the core strength, which your chair helps develop and stay tuned. They've got the core strength to get up, and also the chair encourages getting up.
We have one guy who sits on our chair all the time, and he's 83, and he called me after about 6 months, and he said, "I got out of bed this morning." And at 83, that's good. Someday it's not going to happen. And
Yeah.
said, no, you don't understand. I got out of bed without using my arms. I just sat up and
How
got
about
up.
that?
Because he said, your chair is like giving me back the core strength that I can move around now without having to like hoist myself around. And
the chair is an exercise machine disguised as a chair.
Right, exactly. And if you have to sit, you might as well get something out of it. So that's kind of our mantra.
So if anybody's interested in purchasing your chair, how do they do that?
We have a website, QOR360.com, like core, only spelled with a Q. If you were going to spell core with a Q, you'd spell QOR360.com. It's a website. We have, I don't know, papers and blogs and pictures and videos and stuff to kind of explain our chair project.
And other information that people can find.
Sure.
I will post this also on the YouTube channel site so that people can go if they didn't hear it properly the first time, so that they can go there. And also, I have written some pieces on children and repetitive strain injury that are on my website that I will also post on the YouTube channel. If anybody wants to ask Dr. Osler a question, you can email me, let me know. I hope you come back to the show sometime.
Oh, yeah, no, always delighted. Always delighted.
And I also would recommend that everybody listen to Dr. Osler's interviews on the dangers of sitting and also the dangers of standing on RSI Help Radio, which is linked on my website. So thank you so much for coming to the show, Dr. Osler. I hope that you will come back soon, talk to us more about all these fascinating things. And thanks to everybody for viewing the RSI Help channel. Tell your friends. And remember to subscribe so that you will be notified of new episodes. And you can submit questions or suggestions for future episodes on the show page. So until next time, this is Deborah Quilter signing off from RSI Help channel in New York City. Bye.